Hi everyone, Jaymes Mansfield here bringing you yet another video. Oh my god, you guys, it is a brand new day, a brand new year, and a brand new series because we're doing something iconic, but it's not iconic blondes, it's iconic brunettes. We're working on it. We'll find the note. We will find the note. Now I have here, whoosh, our Mamie in color black. This is the Mamie Black. Yes, she is gorgeous, named after the legendary Mamie Van Doren. She is from Jaymes Mansfield Beauty. She is a very stylable, very affordable wig. For those of you that want to dabble in hairstyling but don't want to like break the bank at it, she is a more budget-friendly option. Today in Iconic Brunettes, I thought in the tradition of old Hollywood, we should bring out the most iconic brunette of old Hollywood. I started Iconic Blondes off with Marilyn Monroe, so we're gonna start off Iconic Brunettes with Elizabeth Taylor. Now, let's get started, okay? You have to understand, before Kim Kardashian, before Madonna, before a lot of these like superstars that just created a sensation of themselves, Elizabeth Taylor, people were obsessed with. If Marilyn Monroe was like that for blondes, Elizabeth Taylor was the it girl brunette. And she knew it and she owned it. She loved being a celebrity and was all about it. And her life was filled with drama. She could never stay out of the tabloids. When she first gotten started, Elizabeth Taylor was actually a child star, believe it or not. Her first movie was Lassie Come Home. And she got the audition because she had basically startled the director. Like, he had never seen a little girl like this. Like, she was adorable. And he made a comment to her mother, like, could you please wipe off the mascara you put on that little girl? And she just said in the most delicate voice, like,
it's not mascara, these are my eyelashes.
No joke, like, she was born with like double set eyelashes. So it looked like her eyes were just clumped, like, it looked like natural mascara. And it caused this effect where it made her eyes look violet. So for a long time, people thought she had purple eyes. Mythology surrounding Elizabeth Taylor is so interesting. The way they documented Marilyn, the way they document like Elizabeth are wildly different. Whereas like Elizabeth Taylor had a very dramatic and drama-filled life that was highly publicized and highly criticized. But when it came down to like raw talent and appreciation of it, I feel like Elizabeth Taylor always got a better rub that way. Like Hollywood was a lot more respectful of her work. Whereas Marilyn's was sort of like something people started to appreciate later on. Elizabeth was always considered like the top echelon of like great actresses. That might also be the case because, well, the public got to know her as a little girl and watched her grow up. Because from Lassie Come Home, she did a bunch of movies and settled on one movie that was like the one that kickstarted her career in a whole new direction, that grew Elizabeth Taylor up. It was National Velvet, the horse movie. She played a horse riding champion, Velvet, and it was a dangerous shoot. Like, she fell off a horse and everything, like she hurt herself, but she finished the shoot because it was so important to her that she do a more mature role and to show that like she's not a little girl anymore. Like, she's growing up, she's in puberty, like everything is changing. It worked. Like, so many teen stars have followed suit in the same way when they have to grow their career up. Like, this was a coming of age film for her. And from there, she went on to start doing even more daring roles in her 20s. Like, people were starting to see her as a woman. And it wasn't until she did the Life magazine shoot, that famous one, where she's like that. So beautiful, like the neck's just swan. Oh, and that like tan gold dress, beautiful. Like, it's always on the list of like the top most beautiful images ever taken. And she's always been ranked in that because like she was a really beautiful woman. Like, people started to look at her in a different way. And when she entered her 20s, her career definitely was taking a different, kind of more scandalous direction. Because she started doing Tennessee Williams like work. Tennessee Williams was like the hot playwright of that time. Like, you think like Quentin Tarantino was in the 90s, he sensationalized all the films then. Tennessee Williams did that, but gayer and way more salaciously and with really, really wittily written dialogue. Elizabeth Taylor was tailor-made for Tennessee Williams. Her big breakout with him was Cat on a Hot Tin Roof, where basically, they couldn't say it back then, but the subtext is that her husband was secretly gay and pining for a lover of his, and she could not figure out why he won't go to bed with her, and like she's frustrated and just won't tell her. But that is the subtext that's of the whole movie. And a play as well. The play, it's even more like, you know, out there and obvious, but in those days you couldn't talk about that stuff, so it all had to be subtext. But never was she more beautiful. Like, especially in like all the artwork for her where she's in like the white like negligee and everything. It's iconic. And from there, the roles got a little more bizarre. Like, she did another Tennessee Williams movie, which I highly recommend. It's long. It is about 15 minutes too long, but it's worth it. It is called Suddenly Last Summer, where Elizabeth Taylor plays a girl who's put in a sanitarium by her cousin's mother. Her cousin mysteriously dies on a vacation with her, and she is traumatized and put in a sanitarium. And you later find out that like she's being kept there for a reason. And the reason will blow your mind. Like, it's all subtext, but it's really easy to pick on exactly what the twist is in it, like the shocking twist. Definitely watch it, because Elizabeth Taylor is like on fire. And this is directly after she had a really big tragedy happen in her life. Her best friend was Montgomery Clift, and he had gotten into a car crash not far from her house. She heard his car crash, and she saved his life. Like, she pulled him from the car and everything. And it was really traumatic, and he was very, very hurt and had to have reconstructive surgery. Like, he never looked the same again. It was such a wreck. Elizabeth Taylor, being that kind of person, like, she went out of her way to save her friend and made sure to make a point to cast him in this role as her psychiatrist. And while filming it, the director was so tyrannical to him and so nasty. So much to the point that Katharine Hepburn, who was also starring in the film, asked when it was her final shot if she was done, if she's wrapped. The director told her, yeah, you're wrapped. She coughed one back and spat right in the director's face because of the way he treated Montgomery Clift. Like, it was that bad. All right, I'm going to roll the rest of this off camera and I'll be right back. All right, we are back. The hair is all curled. I took the rollers down. Now, it is time to start brushing through it so that we can cut it and then tease it. Elizabeth Taylor was becoming rebellious. Now, bear in mind, she was a child star, and like her parents were like stage parents. They made sure she obeyed and she showed up. They wanted a career for this girl. But as she was entering her teens, she was starting to get a little upset because she was so cloistered that she never got to like experience anything normal teenagers got to do, like proms and things like that. Like, she wasn't allowed to go out. It all came to a head when she went into Louis B. Mayer's office with her mother, and her mother demanded that they start giving her better roles. To which Louis B. Mayer cussed her mother out. And Elizabeth Taylor stood up to him and said, you either apologize to my mother or I will walk out on this contract. I will never make another movie again. I don't care. She's like, I want a life. I want to go to proms. I want to have, like, I would love to just have a normal life. And she walked out of the office and was sad to learn the next day she did not get fired. She got better roles. But she learned that she had value and that the studio couldn't just get rid of her because she was making them so much money. So she knew she could exploit that to her own advantage, though. And as she entered her teens and her 20s, she did. Like, she started to become a scandalous figure. As she was doing these amazing roles and things are really coming to a head, she began to settle down a little bit. Like, she married Mike Todd, who, for all records show, was a very happy marriage. Like, she adored him. And it wasn't until tragedy struck her yet again, where Mike Todd sadly died in a plane crash. And Elizabeth Taylor was devastated. And she found comfort in her friends Debbie Reynolds and Eddie Fisher. Couples were inseparable and they were the best of friends. Like, Elizabeth Taylor even had Debbie Reynolds wash her hair on her wedding day. Like, they were that tight. Like, they were best of friends. Well, after Mike Todd's plane crash, Eddie Fisher flew to Elizabeth Taylor's side. And as Carrie Fisher said wonderfully in her one-woman show, Wishful Drinking, he then worked his way to her friend. Yes, he had an affair with Elizabeth Taylor after her husband had died, and this completely rocked their worlds from here on out. Elizabeth Taylor became Elizabeth Taylor the slut, the homewrecker, and this was going to be such a hard reputation for her to shake. And it took years. And mind you, Debbie Reynolds was like America's sweetheart. Like, it was a scandal that was everywhere and exploited to the nth degree. So much so that like Elizabeth Taylor was sort of being punished with the film roles that she was getting after this. Like, one of the major roles that she had gotten and acted in was completely overshadowed because of this scandal. And like, she lost out on a lot of Oscar votes because of it. Those of you who don't know, Oscar votes are very important. Your peers vote on this. And she had betrayed Hollywood by doing this to Debbie Reynolds. So she was not going to win. She needed to basically do a penance walk for them. It was very gross. So the next movie she would make would be the one she would eventually win her first Oscar for, Butterfield 8. Butterfield 8 is not a good movie. It's just not. It's boring, it's long, it's preachy, And it's kind of gross when you know the backstory of it. Elizabeth Taylor plays a call girl. She makes a lot of bad decisions, gets treated really horribly, and then dies a horrible death. You cannot, in movies back then, make what they thought were bad choices and go on to live. Like, you had to be punished for it. So she made this movie, and it exploited her in this way of portraying her as, like, you know, this big, awful floozy. It's like a really gross penance walk that they made her take. And she was nominated for an Academy Award for a movie she absolutely hated. So much so that, like, as she said famously in interviews, there's a famous scene in Butterfield 8 where she writes on the mirror with lipstick, "No sale." Well, she walked to the mirror of the theater after watching it and took out her lipstick and wrote, "Piece of shit." She hated this movie. And it was so scathing to her. But it was a move she had to make in order to advance her career in a way where people were going to stop talking about this. Also, what also helped her was the fact that she had fallen ill, very, very, very ill, and had to have an operation where she nearly died. So one scandal was replaced with everyone being worried that the greatest star of their generation at that time might pass away. So forgiveness was given. People were willing to move on from this. And also she made this movie where she basically put herself out there in a way that was very, very humiliating. And she was rewarded for it with an Academy Award. From here, Elizabeth Taylor would enter the 1960s. The 1960s for Elizabeth Taylor were a wild time. Her relationship with Eddie Fisher was starting to fizzle. They eventually married. And one thing would lead to another. Elizabeth Taylor would meet Richard Burton at a party and fall madly in love with him. And this became an era of Elizabeth Taylor's life that is now the thing of legend. Like, this was beyond the word tumultuous. It was just scandal, one right after the other. Like, Richard Burton was much, much, much older than Elizabeth Taylor, but he was a respected actor. But he was also a known playboy and partier. And Elizabeth Taylor, at that point in her life, was also a known player and partier. So it was just an explosion. They were everywhere on the tabloids. They were fighting, they were breaking up, they were cussing each other out in public, they were loving each other in public. They were trying to spend their enormous fortunes on anything they could, just burning through their money. And it would all come to a head with the movie Cleopatra, which is the bomb to end all bombs. Cleopatra is horrible. Miscast, bloated, over budgeted, and just terrible. When you think about it, like, it was originally just supposed to be like a throwaway vehicle for Joan Collins, who was also incredibly miscast as Cleopatra. But I digress. This movie, the second Elizabeth Taylor and Richard Burton were attached to it, the budget went through the roof. It skyrocketed. She went on to do the Edward Albee play, Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf? They bought the rights to it, and they cast Richard Burton and Elizabeth Taylor in this role as the fighting couple, which was what they were known as publicly at that time. Miscast, mind you, because Elizabeth Taylor's Martha. Elizabeth Taylor was about 20 years too young, and Richard Burton was about 15 years too old to play George. This was a departure for Elizabeth Taylor because it was unlike anything she had ever really done. Like, it was shocking to hear her talk the way she was talking and saying the words she was saying. And at that time with movies, the censorship and Hollywood code were in place, and that kept people in line and what they could do and what they could say. Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf pushed it to the point where they had to create a whole rating systems for movies. It essentially ended the code, but created a rating system so that movies could have more freedom, but also more restrictions, if that makes any sense. Like, they just found a way to keep the same old restrictions, but, you know, find a fun little way to code them now. And if you watch Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf today, you'd be shocked by how tame it is compared to other things that we have seen now. One thing would lead to another, and Elizabeth Taylor and Richard Burton would eventually go their separate ways after marrying, divorcing, getting married again. They finally called it quits for the final time as they entered the 70s. Elizabeth Taylor had had enough and moved on. She would then go on to kind of disappear from Hollywood for a while. She went on and married a senator. She gained a bit of weight, which became like the joke of the town. This great Hollywood beauty was, in the eyes of the public, no longer beautiful because she had gained weight, which is ridiculous, but this is like the rhetoric people were running with. Everybody had Elizabeth Taylor material. Saturday Night Live was doing all sorts of parodies about her. Like, she was the hot topic to just take punches at. But she had the best response to it. Like, Joan Rivers, who was famous for taking pot shots at Elizabeth Taylor, was confronted her at a party to say hello to her because she was a great admirer, even though she said horrible jokes about her. And Elizabeth Taylor just calmly said, look, it doesn't touch me where I live. Which is like, I make far too much money to worry about what you are saying. She's like, don't worry, it won't come to me because I'm not checking for it. Now, the 1980s were an odd time for Elizabeth Taylor's career. As far as movies goes, she wasn't making a whole lot of them. Like, she was honestly becoming an industrious woman in herself. She had launched White Diamonds, the perfume, which was a huge hit. It was so big. Everyone knows White Diamonds, the famous black and white commercial. These have always brought me luck. Yes. This perfume was everywhere. It was a monster hit. And it was like one of the first times celebrities have really endorsed themselves in a way and like went into business for themselves, to where she didn't really need to make movies anymore. Like, she was so wealthy. Now, Elizabeth Taylor was also a huge supporter of the gays. During the 80s, she was one of the few, honestly, one of the only major celebrities in Hollywood that was speaking out the HIV/AIDS crisis and raising money and raising awareness when Ronald Reagan, the president at that time, wasn't saying anything. He acted like it didn't happen. He swept it under the rug. And she was one of the few celebrities that used their platform to raise awareness, have benefits, donate to charities, just spread the word the best she can, because all of her friends were gay. All of her staff was gay. Like, John Waters has been to her house and said, everyone that works there is gay. She surrounded herself with gay men. She loved them. They were like her children. So when something was happening that was taking away all of her friends, she knew she had to do something, especially when one of her best friends, Rock Hudson, had contracted it and suddenly died. Like, she stopped at nothing to raise awareness. Like, I'm honestly just touching like the tips of the iceberg of her career, because honestly, like, her career is so far spanning and so bloated. Like, there's so much to talk about with her. All right, now I'm gonna tease the rest of this. I'll be right back and we will style and cut it. All right, we are back. It is all teased up into a giant bird's nest. All I'm doing here is just brushing it and then finding the ends and trimming it and letting the hair do its own thing. Now, Elizabeth Taylor started doing a lot of television movies in the 1980s. Like, again, she didn't need to do a lot of like films because she had already made her money. Like, she was independently wealthy from so many marriages, so many good business deals, to the point where like she was just kind of sitting pretty and just being comfortable living her own life. Like, she finally was just having her own thing. Scandals had kind of basically passed her at that point. She was just a celebrity. So she dedicated a lot of her time to charity work, especially in the, like I said, with AIDS in the 90s. She really like parlayed her career into becoming this, you know, basically torchbearer for the AIDS crisis in the movement, to make sure that like people were aware. That's why, like, girl, she's like the patron saint for the gays. Like, we love Elizabeth Taylor. Like, she's always up there. Now, one of my favorite Elizabeth Taylor things, I remember seeing her as a child because I didn't really know who she was. I didn't get really into her until I was much, much older. I remember seeing her as a guest star on The Nanny, and that was like next level. My parents made a huge deal about it. They're like, oh my God, I can't believe they got Elizabeth Taylor to do this show. And like, she was taking pot shots at herself and like was fully aware, like the joke of how many times she's been married. She's one of those actresses that is up there with like being married the most times. Like, let me see, just so I have an accurate assessment of how many times it's been. Hey Siri, how many times was Elizabeth Taylor married?
Here's an answer from Vogue.com. Elizabeth Taylor wed a total of 8 times, twice to Richard Burton.
Wow. That's gotta be some kind of record. You go, girl. All right, she's gonna start needing some hairspray. It's like, this is the hairstyle I think of when I think of Elizabeth Taylor. And again, you can play around with the top of it if you want to like give it a swirl or anything like that. Like, all the character depends on what genre you're trying to go for. If you want 80s, like I said, just add a lot of hairspray and make it stringy. We're nearing the end. I'm pretty sure I can just style the rest of this off camera because it's just a matter of smoothing. So we had the general shape of what we want. It's just a matter of like primping it and primming it and just trimming off strays and just shaping it the way we want. But we got like a little bang going in the front, just the way we want it. And you still have enough hair showing to show off that great hairline. Like, it's great. Such great face framing hair. Now I just gotta smooth it a little bit and I'll be right back with the final. Welcome back. This is the final result.
Ooh, this style has always brought me luck.
Oh my gosh, I love Elizabeth Taylor. You understand, like, I've watched that little, like, made-for-TV movie on Elizabeth Taylor, like, 1,000 times, okay? Like, I'm obsessed. I love her. I don't know what, I do know what it is. It's because she's such an icon. She cared so much about the gay community, and she did so much for AIDS research. Like, I adore her. Like, she is a saint in the world of queerness, okay? Like, Elizabeth Taylor is that girl, all right? Now, I'd like to take a moment, a Venmo moment, where I thank everyone who's tipped me on Venmo. I would like to thank Sergio and Patrick and Michelle. Thank you all so much for the tips on Venmo. I really appreciate it. I hope you all enjoyed this iconic Brunettes. Yes. Our very first episode, we have many, many more coming. And if there's an iconic brunette you want to see, leave her name down below. We'll also still be doing iconic blondes, so don't you fret. That will still be coming. And there might even be more hair colors to come. But we're trying out brunettes now because, well, it's a new year. It's time for a new series. And don't forget, if you want to tip me, I am at Jaymes Mansfield on Venmo and Cash App. I even have PayPal listed, as well as YouTube super thanks down below. Now, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And until next time, bye. Now hit the outro. Click here and see how Kimchi Chic slayed me. Or some style wigs from the marvelous Miss Maisel prop sale. Come on, click it, you know you want to. If you don't click it, I'll let the air out of your tires. So click it.